Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a meeting of the North Kingstown School Committee. Today is March 9th, 2010, and tonight is a work session meeting. Please join us and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Mrs. Jarrow, roll call, please.
Linda Avanzado.
Here.
Mel Boyd Benson.
Here.
April Brunel. Here. Larry Cerisi.
Here.
Kimberly Page.
Here.
Douglas Roth. Richard Welch.
Here.
Julia Held.
Here.
Allison Smith.
Here.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarrow. Calendars, please.
On March 11th, there'll be a Facilities Management and Planning Subcommittee meeting, 5 p.m. at the Central Administration Building. On March 11th, there'll be a Negotiations Subcommittee meeting at 4 p.m. at the Central Administration Building. On March 23rd, there'll be a joint meeting between the Town Council and the School Committee, 7 p.m. at the Senior Center. On March 25th, there'll be a Policy Subcommittee meeting, 8:30 a.m., Central Administration Building. On Monday, the 29th, there'll be a Transportation of Students with Special Needs meeting, 5 p.m. in the Central Administration Building. Also on March 29th will be a joint meeting of the Town Council and the School Committee, 7 p.m. at the Senior Center.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarrow. This time we have a recognition award to present. This evening, we have the honor and the privilege of presenting a recognition award. The school community has the honor and privilege of presenting a recognition award to one of our students for the accomplishments, not only in school, but out in the community as well. So this evening, we have a recognition award to present.
Yes. The recognition award is presented to Patrick James Manning in honor of Achievement of Eagle Scout, Troop 152, on March 9th, 2010. Congratulations.
Congratulations. In addition to a recognition award from the school district and the school committee, we also have a citation of recognition from North Kingstown State Representative Ken Carter and Speaker of the House Gordon Fox. And it reads, State of Rhode Island's Providence Plantation citation, be it hereby known to all, the Rhode Island House of Representatives hereby offers its sincere congratulations to Patrick James Manning, Boy Scouts American Troop number 152, North Kingstown, in recognition of attaining the rank of Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts of America. Your commitment and dedication to the values of scouting, citizenships, character, and fitness. The entire membership extends its very best wishes on this memorable occasion, expresses the hope for continued good fortune. Given this day, March 9, 2010, the State House in Providence, Rhode Island, by Speaker Gordon Fox and State Representative Kenneth Carter. And Mr. Carter also enclosed a personal letter to you in here as well. So on behalf of State Representatives, congratulations. Just a couple of quick notes on the Eagle Scout. As we said, it's the highest rank attained by the Boy Scouts of America, and correct me if I'm wrong, a minimum of 21 merit badges is required? Okay. And also a quick history. It was the first one was awarded in 1912 to Arthur Eldred, a 17-year-old from Troop 1 in Long Island, New York. So a long, prestigious history. So thank you very much for all your hard work and your commitment. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, next we're going to move into citizens' comments. Prior to moving into citizens' comments, I'm just going to remind everyone of some ground rules for citizens' comments that the committee's adopted. School committee is committed to allowing members of the public the opportunity to offer their comments and suggestions. The committee recognizes the importance of remaining open to the receipt of public comment on issues relating to education of North Kingstown students. Comments from the public are often prove very invaluable as the committee discusses specific matters and general issues which comes before us during the course of business. The committee's agenda establishes and sets a special time and purpose for receiving such comments and suggestions. Before we go into public comment again, I just want to remind everyone that all of us on this committee are neighbors, citizens, taxpayers. We're all concerned about the students in our schools. We're very aware of whatever we do here affects the town in one way or another. Naturally, we'll all have different opinions. We may agree to disagree. There's really not one way to do anything, and often not a clear right or wrong way of doing anything. Key issue is the school committee would like to allow public comment during its meetings. And as chair of the committee, I cannot allow citizens or school committee members to use the opportunity for personal attacks or for personal issues that are not directly connected to the school department's business. This is an opportunity to speak to the committee on agenda topics impacting the schools. The time is for public comment, meaning that any in-depth conversation or additional information can be had by contacting the administration or school committee members. The administration and the school committee are very responsive and open to accommodating citizens and their concerns and interests. We must be respectful of one another. We're here to listen respectfully, and we will do so with the same expectation that we will be spoken to in a respectful manner. We do not wish to waste the taxpayers' time or money on police presence to maintain order, but should anyone become disruptive, we will have no choice to use their presence to maintain order to allow the school committee business to be done. If we must, we will end public comment if speakers do not abide by the school committee's request to be respectful and on topic as outlined and abide by the 3-minute limit. Again, any speaker to the microphone will be treated with respect by the committee. We ask that the same of the public towards the committee. So I thank everyone for their understanding and anticipated cooperation. With that, we will now open up to citizens' comments.
Jim McGuinn, 412 Chimney Rock, and also president of the North Kingston Taxpayers, of which there's approximately 500 members. I'm getting up to speak tonight about a couple of issues on the agenda. First, citizens' comment and what that entails. Two is the 09-010 budget, the 010-11 budget, and the contract issue. I'd first like to speak on citizens' comment because there was a problem at last week's meeting, the 24th, when after less than 30 seconds I was gavelled down and the meeting was shut down. Now, I don't know who wrote this editorial, but there was an editorial in the paper. School committee members, arrogant, rude, divisive. Second paragraph. People who spoke against the budget were halted and yelled at. The microphone was turned off while two people were trying to speak. Curt and offensive remarks were said by some school committee members towards a few citizens who tried to speak. How disappointing, frustrating, and embarrassing. I would also like to quote from the 2005 letter that was provided by Mr. Stephen Brown of the ACLU to the Coventry School Committee. And in it he writes, in part, Open Meetings Act is silent on the issue of public comment portion of an open meeting. Rather, the opinion is clear in limiting its reach into circumstances where a public body engages in colloquy with a member of the audience. The school committee runs afoul of the First Amendment rights of attendees. In fact, in the past few years, our affiliate has successfully challenged two very similar school district policies where they've tried to limit criticism from people in the public. Mr. Brown goes on to quote several cases from both Rhode Island law, but also from national law, Bach versus School Board, City of Virginia, Leventhal versus Vista United School District, Boca versus Moreno Valley Unified School District.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
3
Walker.
minutes is up.
Mr. McGuinn, could you please wrap up, please?
I would finally like to read you from Pulitzer Prize winning 2009 winner editorial writing, Mr. Mark Mahoney. If you don't exercise your rights yourself, if you don't show the government that you value those rights, eventually you will lose them. For government officials to truly understand and to respond to the need for open government, they have to know that citizens care about it. And they won't get that message if they only are asking the government newspapers are getting the information. The more people who exercise their right to access the government, the less likely governments will feel empowered to operate in secret. The more you challenge them, the less likely you'll be to close a meeting or deny a document. If they know the public is watching them like a hawk, they'll be less likely to try to pull the wool over your eyes.
Thank you,
That
Mr.
man one, I'm going to provide these to the committee,
Thank you.
and anyone who would like to enter them into correspondence may do so.
You can leave them right over here, and the clerk will make copies for the rest of the committee. Thank you. Anyone else for public comment this evening? Okay. If there's no one else for public comment at this time, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Correspondence. Does anyone have correspondence to submit at this time? If that's not already in our packages. Mrs. Page?
Yes, I received 2 pieces of correspondence. The first one was from Mrs. Danette at Suzanne Hensler Quinnesset School, and she announced the 2010 Youth Art Month show, in which she has some 4th and 5th graders who are participating in that. The first was, I'll go down the list of 5th graders, Taylor O'Rourke, Heidi Wadovic, Shannon Brusky, Alexis Johnson, Zoe Ferrara, Ethan Weiland, and Dylan Thomas were the 5th graders, and the 4th graders were Courtney Gray, Catherine Clark, Melanie Fournier, Caroline Brickle, Courtney Naughton, and Christina Bryant. So congratulations to them. I also received further correspondence from Mrs. Danette stating she'd like to recognize Mrs. Cynthia Torillo, who is a parent and their Links volunteer, for her outstanding work in chairing the science fair. And she also wanted to recognize Ms. Danielle Daglieri for her dedication in showcasing the students' talents in the art exhibit, and for sponsoring the traveling art show.
Thank you for sharing that, Mrs. Page. Anyone else have correspondence this evening? Mrs. Benson?
Is it permissible to report some verbal correspondence?
Sure.
Okay. There's a young gentleman in my neighborhood. His last name is Green. He's an 11th grade student at the high school here. And he personally invited me to Pippin's because I attend all of the plays and concerts because it is one of the most professional done series that could challenge Trinity, and it's helping our school. And I'd like to report to the other members of the school committee that there was an excellent job done Sunday with Pippin's. I choose Sunday to come because grandparents are here, mothers and fathers. And I would also like to encourage, it's from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I can't keep up with the other nights. But this was a piece of art. All the children performed. not only the actors in the play, but the band was represented, the strings, and the chorus. And these very short times, and we've got to really pick and work hard. I thought I would pass this on to you before we get into the budget, that there are other organizations within the school that certainly deserve our support and our scrutiny. I asked one of the directors how many direct children were involved with staging, costumes, and all to like. It involved more than 150 of our students.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Dr. Roger would like to add to that as well.
I just want to say, you know, how impressed I was with Pippin. My son was in the pit band. Absolutely loved the experience, and you know, you just can't take for granted how much work Ms. Kayaza and Ms. Schick have put together. I mean, the hours are, I'm not even sure they sleep about for the whole month before the performance like that. It was a tremendous show, and really they deserve a lot of credit for everything that they put together there.
Thank you, Dr. Roger. Anyone else have correspondence to share or submit this evening? Thank you. Moving on, disclosure of executive session votes. Mrs. Jarrow, do we have any executive session votes to disclose?
First, I'll disclose votes from March 2nd executive session. All members were present for the March 2nd executive session. A motion unanimously passed by the members present to go into executive session. A motion passed to seal the minutes of the March 2nd executive session, 6-1, with Douglas Roth voting no. A motion unanimously passed to adjourn the executive session. Now, these are the March 9th executive session. All members were present for March 9th except Douglas Roth and Larry Cerisi. A motion unanimously passed to go into executive session. A motion unanimously passed to deny the grievance. A motion unanimously passed to recess the executive session.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarrow. Moving into the consent agenda. Before we open up the consent agenda, just a couple of updates on the consent agenda. We're going to exempt the item F, the 2010-11 school calendar. Dr. Roger would like to present some updated information on that agenda item. In addition, the following names and positions from consent agenda item G2, which is the approval of 09-10 interscholastic coaches. The following names are being pulled from the agenda this evening because the HR office is waiting for additional paperwork to come through for those individuals, and as soon as it does, it'll be on the next available agenda. So Philip White, which is the boys assistant lacrosse coach. Eric Kraus, boys assistant lacrosse coach. John Kelly, volunteer assistant girls track coach. Jason Roslin, volunteer assistant golf coach. Randy Jones, the head track and field coach, co-head coach. And Lynn Simons, assistant track and field co-head coach. So as soon as Mrs. Gardner from HR has that paperwork, we'll put these items right back on the agenda. Also, just to clarify, on the consent agenda, the coaches' positions that have volunteers next to them or private funding or whatever the case may be, the committee, as we've said numerous times before in the past, the committee is approving the name and the position. We are not approving funding or the funding source. If there's a funding source that's provided at some time in the future, that will be provided to the committee separately to approve as well. Is that correct, Dr.?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So I just wanted to clear up that as part of our process. We are only approving names and positions, not alternative funding sources. At this time, are there any items from the consent agenda to be exempted? Mr. Welch.
Item E, School Committee Action Progress Report. Item G2, I have some questions on.
And also, I'm sorry, Mr. Draper, I believe we're still tabling items D1 and 2, as we're still waiting for further information on those items before we take action.
Yes.
Okay, so for the record, Mrs. Jarrow, items D1 and 2 are still tabled as a result of the committee's last standing vote on those agenda items until we receive further updates and information. Are there any other exemptions from the consent agenda at this time, Mrs. Advisano?
C1.
C1. Are there any other exemptions? Okay, if there's no further exemptions at this time, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve the non-exempted consent agenda items.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. C1, Mrs. Advisano?
Yes, I just exempted these minutes because I wasn't present for the meeting, so I need to abstain from the vote.
Thank you, Mrs. Advisano. Is there a motion at this time to approve C1?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries
Abstain.
5-0 and 1 abstain. Mrs. Advisano abstains. Moving on to F, Mr. Welch.
No, E.
E, I'm sorry, Mr. Welch.
On the progress report update, I was looking for some information from Ned on the conversation between the school district and the town regarding building maintenance that was initiated by the town manager. Could you give us an update, please, Ned?
Yes, we continue to work together in a variety of areas, the vehicles, some public works projects, as well as some back and forth during snow events and some other things. Also the H1N1 flu clinics. As far as a bigger picture in terms of merging services or merging workforces, we have discussed how the two union contracts would align. I believe the ESP contract on the school side would go first, and the 1099 union goes in 2012. So as far as lining up the two workforces, we'd have to see what happens in 2011 when we work with our contract again.
Thank you. Still on the progress report, the video streaming, Granicus, we had taken that on with a proviso that we were going to review that. Can somebody give us an update as to when we will review Granicus?
I could place that on our next agenda for Dr. Thornton to present an update to the committee.
Thank you.
Mrs. Jarrow, could you just make a note of that, please?
Thank you.
And-
Continuing on, I'd like to direct your attention to the date of 9/22/09. And if I could please have the clerk read across 9/22/09 turf roller.
Motion was made by Doug Roth to approve item E1, seconded by Kim Page.
My reason for bringing this to your attention was because recently there was a letter in the newspaper that castigated me personally for being a spendthrift with the town's money by spending $10,000 on a turf roller. Anyone who is familiar with the turf roller and the conversations that went on at this school committee would know that if there was anyone who was against buying, procuring, having this committee support the purchase of a turf roller, it had to be me. Now, it's kind of interesting to find out in reviewing the documents of what you just read, Deb, that the person who made the accusation is the person who made the motion. I just wanted to make that a matter of public record. It's too bad he isn't here to hear on that situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Is there a motion to approve item E at this time?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Moving on to F, the 2010-11 school calendar, Dr. Roger.
Thank you. Also, Mr. Abedisian is here tonight, and if he would like to comment as well, I'd be more than happy to have him share the microphone with me for this. In front of you is a calendar that the superintendent has recommended for this year. It is a little different from the calendar that you received a few days ago in your packet, and I will explain. The calendar committee that you asked me to chair met a number of times, and we came up with a number of recommendations, and we discussed that at a previous school committee meeting. And a few of the goals from that committee have been met. Two of the most significant ones I'd like to talk to you about before presenting this calendar to you and the superintendent's recommendation. The first is about professional development days. Right now, the district has 5 professional development days. They are called professional development days, but they're not strictly used for professional development. There are a number of things that take place during that time, including professional development, but also including parent-teacher conferences for elementary and middle school teachers, something called articulation, where teachers get together and talk about the kids that they had and the kids that, I'm going to get next year. That usually happens at the end of the year. It takes place between primarily elementary and middle school students, but also middle school students entering the high school. And part of that is also about orientation, which is an important meeting to have at the beginning of the year, but it's not necessarily professional development either. In some ways, it could be the start of professional development, actually. What we're proposing with this is to use those 5 days. We're in a negotiation year, so a lot of this is to be negotiated in the teacher's contract. But to convert those days to actually being really more true PD days, true professional development days for all teachers. And in doing that, we would have the first professional development day the day after our initial orientation at the beginning of the year. And then there is one day, as you can see, lands at the end of each of the next, or at the beginning of each quarter. So the first one is before the first day of the school year. The second one is right at the end of the first quarter, beginning of second quarter. The third one is at the beginning of the third quarter, and the fourth one is at the beginning of the fourth quarter. And what that does is, we've made this huge commitment in this district toward common assessments. And it is one thing to make that commitment, but everything needs to be working together for a program like that to work. And teachers need time to meet with one another, to review the goals that they had for the quarter around a particular common assessment, a particular learning that they want students to do, and time to look at those results, to talk about what it is the kids have learned and what they haven't learned, and make decisions about what we're going to do for those kids who still haven't gotten it yet, and how are we going to improve our instruction to make sure that in the future they do get it. Likewise, it's a day to kind of take stock in things and prepare for the new quarter. There will be another common assessment in the following quarter, and we need to look at that, make sure that our expectations are the same, talk about best teaching strategies, and simply, use that time to prepare. That's something that we also build common planning time during the regular school day, but there is a real value to having a full day, no kids around, to really sit down and go deep into that work. So that's one piece of this. There is still the matter of parent meetings and the articulation work, and what we're proposing is to do that work during after-school time. So we would be looking at 4 professional days, 4.5 with the orientation, and then a half a day to be negotiated toward after-school time so that teachers can do parent conferences when necessary and also do the work for the PBGR elements at the high school, like the senior project and the electronic portfolio, where teachers are asked to be judges for those kinds of events. So we're hoping to make that conversion, but again, that piece of it needs to be negotiated. The second piece that was probably the biggest issue that was brought forth by the Calendar Committee is the change in the way we go about the Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in September, and Good Friday, which of course happens in the spring. We felt that those are days that relatively few people observe, and observances can be done in after-school hours. We also felt, particularly with the days in September, that those were days that we would like to have so as to keep the continuity of the school calendar going, and there will also be 2 more days that we could use toward, before our state assessments happen. And we found that particularly when you have like this season, this primary day, there are a number of days that break up September. So as you can see, you have a lot of starts and stops in the month of September. It's hard to really get going, and it's an important time of year, particularly with state assessments coming up in October. The problem with this measure, and I don't know if it's just simply an issue of timing, but I've done some work contacting the administrators, I've talked about this with the teachers union, and I've also talked about this with the head of ESP. And I do not have for you an agreement from all of those groups to say we're okay with particularly the Good Friday piece. And the reason that that one comes to mind is because that is specifically mentioned in their contracts as a vacation day or as a day out of school. It's a holiday that's listed specifically as Good Friday in their contracts. So there would need to be a memorandum of agreement about that. In talking about this with Dr. Thornton today and, over the last week or so, well, I don't know if you want to pick it up from here, but we felt like while we did follow through on some of the provisions from the Calendar Committee, and you can see what those are below, particularly the approach to professional days, the fact that the professional days that we can do are on a Friday so as not to break up the week for kids and adults alike, that this measure I don't think we're ready for yet. And the reason is that I think we need to have more time to, allow the community to understand that we're proposing it. I don't think that even with this agenda item going out that people fully realize that this is a proposal tonight to change Jewish holidays and Good Friday. And B, to give time to those bodies, the different unions, to get together and say, is this something that we can live with? It wouldn't necessarily change the number of days those groups work, because they'll still be working the same number of days per their contract. But it is specifically mentioned in their contract, so they don't have to talk about the implications. And of course, they too would have to consider the issue of a religious observance and what that means to them. And I just don't think there's been enough time. And I know, the Calendar Committee's had a lot of time, but this piece of it just kind of came up upon us in the last few weeks. And so I don't think we're quite ready to propose that at this moment. But we would look to do that possibly for next year once we get more information and memorandums of agreement from those groups.
So to sum it up, I'm looking for action this evening to approve the calendar that has on top draft superintendent's recommendation.
Okay. Before we move to any quick questions or comments, I'll, as Dr. Roger had mentioned, Mr. Avedisian is here, who's a teacher here at the high school, as well as a member of the calendar subcommittee, and he and his students were the first to put forward a lot of these thoughts and ideas and initiatives. So, Mr. Avedisian, before the committee has any discussion or votes, as a member of that subcommittee, would you like to make any quick comments?
I'd just like to thank everyone for moving forward on this. This has been a long time coming. The kids put this together, started working on this over a year ago, and each time it was received with open arms to look at this. One of the things that I started looking at last week, I was kind of surprised to see primary day as a day off, and I did send Dr. Auger an email on this the other day. They passed this law 3 years ago,
fine.
And I was kind of blown away that they would have the audacity to give a day off 2 weeks into school. So I called the Secretary of State's office and asked for the elections department, and I explained to them, I said, we might have the opportunity in North Kingstown to hold a primary without using any schools because you have Wickford L, Davisville L next year would be offline, the senior center, town hall, et cetera, library. And I said, do we really have to close schools if we don't use any schools? And he goes, you bring up a good point. He goes, I would tell you that you probably don't have to close schools if you did that. He goes, but you better call the Board of Elections. So I called the Board of Elections, and he said, you most definitely have to close schools. I said, well, you're not understanding me. I said, we might have the opportunity not to use any school buildings. He goes, it doesn't matter. I said to him, is this done so you can increase voter turnout, which I thought would be the reason why you would close schools? And he said, no. And I said, could you explain to me why then? And he wouldn't do it. So I said, okay, thank you very much. And then I called Senator Sheehan, who's a Tollgate High School teacher, and he said he's got numerous complaints from superintendents, school committees, parents, et cetera, about this. And he was actually, he didn't want to tell me this, but he did. He said he was actually one of the people that brought forward this bill originally. And he said, what happens to bills, as we all know, they get lobbied and changed and changed and changed and changed. They have lots of fine print added to them. And just before the vote, a piece of fine print was put in there, which he did not read carefully, which said we would close schools. And he was very forthcoming with this information. He blamed himself for not reading it completely. And he said it passed, and it was lobbied heavily by the Board of Elections. I said, okay, what happened next? And he said, well, I went to have that bill rescinded or removed this last fall, and I couldn't get it out of committee to have the bill completely removed. I said, well, could you try again? He goes, well, I'd be willing to try again, but we might have to try a different tactic. He goes, I would need your school committee, other school committees, Association of Superintendents to contact me and basically ask us to put an amendment to the bill that said if we have the opportunity not to use any school buildings, could we remain open? And if you were to word it that way or basically approach him that way, he would be willing to support an amendment to that bill. So I'd ask that the school committee and the Association of Superintendents look at that possibly so that we can, you see where that is. September 14th is just outrageous for a primary where we know not that many people come out and vote, and it really does disturb the school calendar.
Dr. Dalton?
Just two fast thoughts on that. The Super Association actually talked about that last week, and we had two messages. First, it was it's the law, don't even think about changing it. And second, we did put forward a list of quote-unquote mandates we want to see change, and that was on one of our lists to say we don't need that. We have this book as a body, but they made it quite clear it is not on the list to change right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Mr.?
No, I know I walked it kindly. I was just unclear. Are we going forward next year with not being open on Jewish holidays, and because Good Friday falls on April vacation week, so it doesn't come into play next year? Is that how we're going?
The calendar that we have in front of us here has a recommendation to stay closed for those holidays.
Closed for those holidays.
But because of the way these holidays fall, only one of those holidays is actually a school day, and that is Rosh Hashanah. So that jump stop thing happening in September, we start September 1st, the first school day. Labor Day is, so we have 3 days of school and Labor Day. We have 2 days of school and Rosh Hashanah. We have 2 more days of school, and we have primary day. So it's kind of tough to kind of get rolling.
Right.
But that's where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Roger. Thank you, Mr. Avedizian, for your time and work on the subcommittee, and thank you to your students as well. Just one quick thing I wanted to point out before the committee moves any further with this agenda item. Mrs. Brunel just pointed out to me, it appears that there's a discrepancy in that Tuesday, November 2nd is highlighted, which I believe it's Election Day, but it's not in the list below as far as the list of days that schools will be closed. So just for clarification purposes, Tuesday, November 2nd, schools are closed, and that would be included in that list below as well?
Yeah, it's probably just a,
Professional development, you have it under professional
oh,
development.
it's listed under professional
Oh,
development.
okay.
But we chose that day because it is election day.
Great.
And schools are closed anyway, so that was kind of a 2-for-1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that for us. Okay, is there a motion at this time to approve the superintendent's recommended 2010-11 school calendar?
Mr. Chair.
We can certainly have discussion. I'd like to see if we can get a motion on the table first before we move ahead with discussion, and we'll also have public comment as well. Is there a motion to approve the 10-11 school calendar?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I wanted to
Second.
make some remarks before we had the discussion. I would think, or the vote, I would think it would add a little light to what we are going to be voting on. Would that be permissible?
Yeah, we're going to have discussion process.
The vote will have been
We're
taken.
we're not taking the vote, Mrs. Benson. We're taking a motion, and then we're going to have discussion, as we always do. That's the process we follow. There's been a motion by Mrs. Advisano to, I'm sorry, Mrs. Page? Mrs. Brunel, okay. Motion by Mrs. Brunel to approve, seconded by Mr. Welch. Before we move into a vote, we're going to have committee discussion. Mrs. Benson.
I would like to also thank the calendar committee for their work, but I have two questions. And one will be directed to you, Mr. Abedisian. I've known about your good works in civics and dealing with your children, and they have done a good job. And I'll give you a little clarification on why we chose to close school on primary day. Some 5 or 6 years ago, there was not enough citizen participation in things that was affecting our state that was on the ballot. And if you remember, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a big rush all through America about people not participating in the democratic process. So this was done with one of that reasons in mind, along with the other 49 states in the Union. And primary day is a very important day in the political process. And I consider it, and many people do all over America, because that's where you get on the train or get off the train. And with seniors in high school, and we lowered the voting age, and it has even been lowered lower. Are you aware that at 16, when you go to get your driver's license, you can pre-register?
Yeah, they come here and register the kids.
I say, are you aware of that, even though they come here?
Well, yeah, it's done when you get your driver's license.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
At 16. So I would ask you to think about that, and that was the question that I wanted to pose to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Abedisian. And my next question is to the committee. You have Good Friday on here to be closed, and you have another religious holiday. And I would be amiss if I didn't say this. There's a good book out, and it's very prevalent. Are we eroding our values?
Mrs. Benson, this calendar does not vote,
I know it
recommend to
don't
do
vote,
away
but
with
I
those
wanted to give you
holidays.
some ideas
Yeah.
to carry back, since this is preliminary.
This is the final draft from the subcommittee and the recommendation of the superintendent, and the calendar that's being proposed to us this evening does recognize those holidays that you mentioned. Mrs. Advisano?
I'm looking here, and it doesn't.
This may be what, I don't know, Mrs. Benson,
I'm
if you
looking
were
at a
asking.
chart right here. You have right here.
On the 9th, it recognizes Rosh Hashanah.
Uh-huh.
Good Friday this upcoming year happens during April break.
I noticed that you said that. But if we're going to do a calendar, will we be doing a new calendar every year?
We do a new calendar every year.
Okay, well then that takes care of this one, and thank God Good Friday's on
On a Friday.
On the list, is what you meant.
Thank you.
Thank God Good Friday's on a holiday and also a day of school closing, because I would very stringently reject to that until we got input from another sector of our community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Mrs. Advisano?
Just a quick question. Did we have Yom Kippur on previous calendars, and is that a change?
Yes.
Oh, that's been there preceding my time. It's been on the books.
Okay. I just would want to make sure that people were aware that this was part of the vote that we're going to be taking. And I don't know.
Mr. Welch?
I'm sure that I'll cause some reaction on this.
I find that highly unlikely. But go ahead.
You know, you talk about the religious holidays, which I think are important, and I'm in favor of leaving them the way they are. And we're going to have a day off for a primary that may, in fact, not even happen. I mean, let's be realistic about it. Unless you have a primary, there's no reason to have primary day off. But when you consider the discussions that you folks have had on, especially the religious holidays, and I know this is a very strong Italian state, and I'm not Italian, and it has nothing to do with the founder of the Americas. Christopher Columbus Day on the 11th of October is certainly a day that should have been considered long before changing religious holidays. And I think, you know, that's something that you have missed the boat on. Not wanting to offend my Italian friends, it's got nothing to do with being Italian or American or anything else. Let's face it, what is the observance? And what are the students really doing? Religion is an important situation for home life, et cetera, and I almost, you know, shudder to think how many of the kids that are taking this day off actually know why we even celebrate Columbus Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Just quick mention of, we do have a 9 o'clock adjournment on our agenda this evening for our executive session that follows tonight's open session. So I just want to remind the committee of that, if we could hopefully move through these agenda items. With that in mind, as far as Columbus Day or any of the holidays, I'm sure we all have our views and opinions, but some of these holidays are recognized state holidays, and they're recognized recognized contractually in the employee contracts as well. So some of these holidays it's not an option whether or not we recognize them on our school calendar. There's been a motion to approve. There's been a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 5-1.
Wait a minute.
Mrs. Page was no. Mrs. Jarrett? Okay, moving on to G2, Mr. Welch.
Okay, got a couple of questions on this. I know that we've taken some of the names off the list because of some paperwork due at HR, but I'm looking at a couple of things. One is we have listed here a name that's going to come back up, John Kelly, volunteer assistant girls track coach, and this volunteer is on the paperwork here to receive as a volunteer $2,627. Can I volunteer for that?
Which one was that again? Oh, okay.
Can you run?
Volunteer assistant girls track coach,
Mr.
John Kelly.
Mr. Dr. Thornton, it looks like, third one from the top on the second page is listed as a volunteer, and there's a amount attached to that volunteer position. Mrs. Gardner?
Yes, I called the athletic director, and he did apologize. He made a mistake. That should be 0.
Thank you. Continuing on, Mr. Chairman.
One second, Mr. Welch. Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. Mrs. Jarrett, can you just please reflect that in the minutes, so if the committee does take action on that, it is reflected in the minutes as well? Thank you. Mr. Welch?
Thank you. Considering that we're dealing with young bodies, both female and male, it's extremely important to understand that the people that we are putting in the position of being coaches and assistant coaches and volunteer assistant coaches have more than just an interest in what they're doing. And it concerns me that whether or not we have any qualifying specifications, if you will, for people to be such things as head coaches and assistant coaches. And going further into that, I'm looking at, in particular, the spring weight training coach. This could be a place where somebody could really get hurt, in my mind. So my question is, does this person have any actual professional training to have that position? How many youngsters would take advantage of this? And is there any charge that these youngsters would have to pay in order to take advantage of this weight training?
We can come back to you next meeting with detail on that.
I would appreciate that. My last comment would be that in this era of tight financial situations and not knowing what our condition is going to be with our budget after we get past the town council and we see what the state is going to do to both the town and state aid, my recommendation would be that I can't vote on the assistant coaches. I can't vote on anyone getting any money past the head coach. It's not an obligation under the contract. Assistant coaches could be volunteers, and of the people that we have listed, that would amount to $26,394 savings in this spring coaching session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. I think Dr. Thornton wanted to speak to that.
Sure, let me give you one example. Having been a track coach, I can speak to this. Picture 17 events, javelins flying around, shots, discs, pole vaults, hurdles, a lot of places for injury. In terms of coaching, if you only have one adult watching 50, 60 kids at 17 events, a lot of liability there. So for that reason alone, I would think I would want my assistant coaches out there keeping kids safe.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. I certainly I share the safety concerns that Dr. Thornton shares, and I also share the budgetary concerns, obviously, that Mr. Welch shares. Should it be required that the school committee cuts their budget further as a result of any action through state funding or through local funding, I think we've all had this discussion before, that obviously everything would be back on the table at that point for possible further reductions to have a balanced school budget. So, is there anyone else? Mrs. Page?
Just to bring up, Mr. Welch did ask a couple of questions about Mr. Shabo. I know that Mr. Shabo has been our weight training coach for a couple of years, and I also know that while we don't charge for weight training during the school season, during the summer we do charge. If the students come in during that time, they're asked if they could pay a $55 fee to come in during the summer to use weight training.
Anyone else? Mrs. Benson?
In reference to the finances, and will we be able to do these for the spring? It's almost time for them to be done, and the money for this year would already be in the budget, am I correct, for the spring sport?
That's correct.
That's correct, Mrs. Benson. It's a good point that this is for the 09-10 school year, which is coming out of the current 09-10 budget and not the 10-11 budget, which goes into effect July 1st. Thank you for clarifying that.
And I would also like to add to that we will have some sense of where we're going when the 10 and 11 budget come out, and then we will have an opportunity to go over all of these extracurricular activities and the sports. And concerning the volunteers, I'm sure they all have been checked out because there are stringent rules about working with children. And of course, we would, we have done that, and it has been checked out. I'm sure we don't have people that's not there, but the liability is always there, so that would be covered under our trust
Right.
or something, would it?
That's correct, and that's the reason why several of the names were removed from tonight's agenda and will hopefully be on our next agenda, because the paperwork that's required has not been submitted to HR at this point. So when that paperwork's submitted, they'll be back on the agenda for consideration. Mr. Welch?
Yes, quickly, I just would remind the committee that there's a supplementary budget that is sitting out there at the legislature. If you don't think that we're going to get a cut in state aid to education, got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd love to sell you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. There's a motion on the table to
Get a
approve.
cut.
That's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Motion carries 5-1. Moving on to, I believe that concludes the consent agenda. Moving on to unfinished business, 9-10 school budget. I'll defer, that's the current budget year. I'll defer to Dr. Thornton and Mr. Draper at this time if there's any updates for the current budget year for the school committee.
Nothing for 9-10, but comments for 10-11.
Okay, moving on to 10-11. Dr. Thornton, Mr. Draper.
For 10-11, just some thoughts just to consider as we go forward towards the town council. I know in talking to folks, these things have come up, so if I could just spend a few minutes. I know I've heard some questions about if Rhode Island gets raised to the top money, then maybe we would now have a lot of money on hand to fix our budget needs. Just to be clear, we had to sign on with RIDE with the application I shared with you. I think we checked off some 17 areas. These are all new things or supplemental. Unfortunately, we can't spend the money we receive to plug budget holes. That's called supplanting, and that's against the regulations. So just so you know, if we get the money, we're doing new things that will help us in many cases, but not things we can plug the holes with. I know folks often ask about what I would call a one-to-one correspondence. They would say, so we have less kids, why not a lot less teachers to match? Well, my simple analogy is this. You have a classroom, you have heat, electricity, teacher, and kids. Whether you have 24 kids in a room or 19, it's the same FTE in the room. At some point, you do see teachers go away. We saw a couple last year pop out of grade, I think grade 1, grade 2. But you get to the point where, as you know, you've seen my sections. It looks like this. Remember the section reports we look at with the K-5? And at some point, you get to the point where you're at the class numbers, K's 19, grade 5, 26, et cetera. So I would say, you know, there is not a one-to-one correspondence, but things do come off the books as you go down. In terms of breakage, that's been asked a lot. Breakage is in the budget. It's dispersed, if you will. Our assumption was $400,000, and that was a historical average number. The funding formula. Tonight, I gave you an extra piece of correspondence. Mrs. Benson had asked, I went to a meeting last Thursday morning, I believe, on the funding formula. It's one of many funding formulas out there in Rhode Island. We had a very long, candid conversation with Carolyn Diaz and other folks from the state. And I gave you probably a quarter of an inch of paper, but the biggest piece to look at speaks to the second page. And you see a little line I drew in the 6-point font. It tells you in this model, if it came true, in year 1, we'd realize a $561,000 reduction. In year 2, it would be $259,000, and then we're done. Believe it or not, we're one of the lucky ones in this model. Some of our neighbors aren't so lucky. Is this good news? No, but can we survive? Yeah, I think we'll survive, but it's not good news at all. But in terms of our budget, just to be clear, the budget you approved does not take into account the 561. So keep that in mind in your ledger of things kind of hanging out there. In terms of health coverage, as you know, we modeled 10%. We're looking at 17%. That's another $400,000 not assumed in the budget equations. Now we're up to, say, $900,000 and change we have to kind of figure out, okay? The last piece I would tell you is year over year in the budget book, we always look at FTEs and who's there and who's not there. And it's truly a moving number in terms of we get new kids in, IEPs, paras come, paras go, teachers in, teachers out. The actual, I just want to be clear, year-over-year number right now is 38 less people from 07 to 2010. Earlier I said 50, and that's incorrect. I believe at one point it was 50, but didn't survive to the year-over-year calculation. So I want to be clear on the record, it's 38. That's the number in terms of admin, maintenance, paras, et cetera. So with that, I'd open up to any questions you have and anything about that.
Just a quick comment, actually, to expand on your comments on the reduction of FTEs. The superintendent has said 50 several times. I've said 50 several times as well. And looking back at our numbers and mid-year budgets, as the superintendent said, at one point, maybe for a brief time, we were at 50, but as Mrs. Gardner, the HR supervisor, knows, unfortunately, that number didn't hold until the end of the budget year. So right now, it looks like that total is correct at 38 from 07 to 2010. And looking at some of the additions of staff, FTEs, which brought that number from 50 down to 38. I can recall generally, as the superintendent said, we added some one-to-one paras to meet the needs of students, IEPs in the district, as well as students that were previously in out-of-district placements who came back to the district that required one-to-one paraprofessionals as part of their IEPs and services. And I believe we, as an increase of transportation, we added several bus drivers as well for special needs transportation. So that certainly played a role in changing that number. Thank you for outlining those updates, Dr. Thornton. Any questions or comments from committee members at this time on the 10-11 budget? Mrs. Avezzano?
Just a quick comment. I want to thank Dr. Thornton for the clarification on the FTEs and also on the budget cuts that we have not dealt with yet. I just want to recognize the transparency of coming forward with things like that. Things have changed a lot around here. I'll just note that. And I'm sure you have some great ideas for the 900K, so we'll wait for those.
We do. Stay tuned. We have some ideas.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Avezzano. I'm sorry, one quick comment that I did not make. And in recognizing the superintendent, the transparency in recognizing some of the what-ifs that remain hanging out there budgetary-wise. You know, last year, this administration and the committee as well faced some criticism for reducing its budget based on some assumptions and cuts in state aid. As far as why would we reduce the budget based on assumptions in state aid. And I'm sure this year we'll face some criticism for not making some of the reductions based on assumptions of funding formulas and state aid as well. As we see, not only with the school budget, but with town budgets, school budgets, other towns and school budgets, and the state budgets. I mean, the budgets are moving targets, and mid-year adjustments and amendments will be made to budgets to reconciliate any additional revenues that the district receives, which I highly doubt we'll see that. But I'm sure we'll see additional expenditures or additional cuts in our funding sources where we'll need to reconcile our budget to reflect those cuts. So, you know, you don't want to go too far down the road of making cuts based on assumptions, but I do think we need to be transparent and recognize that these numbers are out there, and they're real, and very real possibility that we'll be at this straight through the budget year and making some reconciliations in the budget for cuts in funding. So it's a process we've been through several years in the past, and it's just budgets are tight and funding is tight, so those adjustments will need to be made. Mrs. Brunel?
And I'd also like to share with the community and members here at the table that as we go through the budget process, we are mindful of rumors and misinformation, and it had been brought to my attention that theater would be on the chopping block, and that is why students had to do so much fundraising. I just wanted to check in with Dr. Thornton. I'm to understand in this budget we have here, there is money in there for the theater program.
Sure. All clubs and activities are fully funded in the budget you passed.
Okay.
However, to be clear, if we were to be cut below the number, we provided a list of things that would be on the table, and those activities are on the table if we go below the number.
Right. Right now, the budget does have that in there. It is, you know, I just want to be mindful of that because it was, you know, passed around and rumored at Pippin that we had already cut theater. So I'd really like to clear that up, that, and as most community members do know, at the time of cutting, that there were a lot of things that were presented, and we haven't even had that dialogue yet. I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to set that matter straight.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mrs. Brunel. Mr. Welch?
Last meeting, we had a unanimous vote on looking for relief on certain unfunded mandates. Has that letter gone out?
We have two letters that went out, one for mandates and one for charter schools, one by Mrs. Carroll's office. Ms. Carroll, is yours? Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mrs. Page? Mrs. Page?
So, Dr. Thornton, I want to make sure that, since I wasn't here last Wednesday, that I have the numbers down right. You're saying that from our state education money that is, that we're being cut back, we're going to be $900,000 less than what we had voted then on Wednesday night. Am I correct?
No, what I'm saying, the budget you voted on didn't take into every variable. There are a lot of variables this year in the air in Rhode Island. One is health insurance. We budgeted a 10% increase, which is a pretty good historical number. We learned just a ways back that we're looking at a 17% increase. That's a 7% difference. That's a $400,000 number that's out there we have to deal with. We also are hearing a lot about funding formulas. There are several formulas out there. Carolyn Diaz from the state took us through one of the formulas that's RIDE is currently promoting, and on page 2 of your package shows you the winners and losers in Rhode Island. You know, we lose $529 in year 1 and 2 and change in year 2, and we're 810 is our total number. So what I'm saying is we still have to be cognizant, even if you pass this budget, we have to think of something else to do to reconcile the 900 some odd 929 that's out there. And also, I would just add one more piece. I believe at the town council last week also, there was some talk of maybe reducing us further. If that was to come true, that would add to our number.
Are we going to be making any proposals before we meet with the town council on the 29th as to how to reach the number in terms of the health care, not making any assumptions about the town council number, so that isn't what I'm asking,
Sure.
but about the state funding?
In terms of the funding formula?
Right, if we're being dropped,
Right. I guess my thing would be, I mean, I don't know which funding formula will carry the day, if any, or if the governor's proposed cut of $400,000 will come true. We just don't know what's going to happen yet, so I don't know. It's out there, but we don't have anything concrete to go on. So I'm not sure if we react till we know what the number is. But we know it could be $400 from the governor, it could be $529 from the funding formula. No one's said we're getting money. Everyone's taking it. It depends what number it is. But
right, so that's why I was asking if we're going to start at the lowest number and start basically saying this is where we need to cut because we know we'll probably be cut this amount.
right, I guess what I'm saying is not knowing the number, I'm not ready to react yet. I think I'm waiting to see what they're going to do. I also, in all honesty, the budget we looked at, the things on the bottom of the list, as bad as they are, that's where I'd go. If I had to go and get 400, that's where I'd go. If there's nowhere else, I would recommend we go.
Okay, but the things at the bottom of the list aren't exactly spelled out as to how much we take from each area. So that would be the only reason that I was wondering if you were going to provide us more in-depth numbers on what those meant.
If the committee wants, we can come back with numbers.
I think that would be helpful because I know right now, I mean, the last sheet that I received, that we were still at the to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
So at least we can start asking more intelligent questions as to where we are going to determine those cuts are going to come once we start being confronted with how much will be taken.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. Mrs. Avisano?
Yeah, getting the numbers might not be a bad idea, but in terms of making cuts now, make those kind of cuts now. And if the state doesn't pass a formula at all, doesn't reduce us, we've reduced our own budget, then we get cut by the town council, then we're in a nightmare, because you can't go back. So I think it's wise to wait, but also to have some idea of where we might be going. I agree with Ms. Page on that in terms of numbers, just to have a general idea.
Mrs. Benson?
Adding to what Committeewoman Page and Avanzado said, I hope you're aware that we haven't gotten the end of the money for 2.9 and 2.10 because the supplementary budget has not been accepted. So we don't know what's going to fall out, because if the supplementary budget is cut, we'll have to immediately make other cuts, and that's still in the hopper. And that's for the rest of this year's activities.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Any other questions or comments from committee members on the 10-11 budget? Thank you. Dr. Thornton, before we move off of this agenda item, was there any recommendations or action you're requesting from the committee at this time on the 10-11 budget?
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. I think we had a couple of citizens who had requested to make public comments on the 10-11 budget. This is a work session, and so we do allow public comments on the individual agenda items. So at this time, if there's anyone who would like to make a quick public comment on that specific agenda item, the 10-11 school budget, now would be the time.
(10-11) school budget. A couple things. First of all, on the transportation to improve that and also reduce the cost. Some investigation after one of our recent meetings where it was identified that GPS on the buses really doesn't relate to Versatrans, which is the optimization system. Versatrans markets itself as the largest school GPS systems optimizer. So it actually, just like barcode at a store is used to input the data, they use GPS. They also own Munis, so they integrate into Munis, and there's an opportunity to look into that. And as I said, a consultant, short money for some potential savings of $100,000 or more. A consultant, I've got the name of one, who doesn't even travel to the district. He can work on WebEx and whatnot and help the district to optimize their bus routes. So that's one opportunity. Second opportunity, as Ms. Page was, I think you were talking about the Blue Cross, and that is, there are ways to go from that 17% and get it down to 2 or 3%, and one is a deductible. Most people who own cars have a deductible on their insurance. There's a deductible, and there's potentially the school could put a health insurance savings plan together that would help defray that deductible, but that's worth about 14% if you had a $500 deductible on the 17. Higher co-pays for doctor's visits, higher co-pays for drugs, just from the difference between $7 and $10 makes a big difference. We have, because we've laid off people, we've got an aging population, we've got a higher experience rate. I've talked to some executives at Blue Cross. I talked to a board member on Saturday, and I talked to an executive today to get some information on that. There's also the town authorized, I think it's 16 or 20,000 for an IT study to have consultants from outside the state who don't know anyone to come in and look at our IT, both the town and the school, and see what we could do to optimize our IT. We work off the same financial system. That's the major system that the school and town use. There's many opportunities. It was identified by the current chairman 3 years ago that there was money to be saved in IT. We ought to be doing that. That's money that gets saved every year. And finally, Davisville Elementary. If you're going to close the building, close the building. That not only would save in your budget, but it also would defray the cost of the bond for Wickford L, which is something that you want to go to, and would also make it so that if you do want a bond in the future, which I think you'll need, you will be more successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuinn. Just for clarification purposes, the budget that the committee passed has the status of Davisville Elementary School as a shuttered building at this time.
Correct.
So there's no money in the budget for Davisville Elementary School. So, Mr. Draper, would you like to just comment for clarification purposes on the insurance? I know we've done plan adjustments in the last contract to offset some of the...
Yes. When we found that 17% increase, we did meet with the union leadership. We did share with them the different options that exist for reductions and modifications to the plans, not in a formal negotiation, but just so that everybody's aware of what those changes could mean.
Right. If memory serves me correct, the current teacher's contract, which expires August 31st, in that contract, we did make plan changes to the health coverage to offset some of the health insurance increases at that time, correct? There were some plan modifications made to offset some of the increases?
The support professionals did have some modifications to the existing plan structure that
So
the teachers haven't yet.
Obviously, during negotiations, that'll be a topic that we'll need to visit to try to offset some of these increased costs in health insurance. Thank you, Mr.
Just to clarify also, in Davisville L, we did leave some money in the budget for heat and routine maintenance to keep the building clear for snow removal, fire alarm, that sort of thing.
Basic heat on 50 degrees, whatever it may be. Just
correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Draper. Okay, if there's nothing else on the, I'm sorry, Mrs. Benson?
I would just like to add to what Mr. Draper said, and I'm sure he's aware of it. Let's don't take Davisville off the list at the Department of Education, even though we are closing it. There is a clause. I had to do a lot of work when we closed Wickford School. There is a clause that it may remain in a school status, and you'd have so many years. Don't just send up there closed, because otherwise it triggers everything. I'm sure he and Dr. Thorne know about that, but I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Yep, just to clarify, it's not closed per se. The budget reflects it as...
It would be in our classification
right,
as a school.
The budget reflects it as offline at this time. Okay. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is CIP, existing bond and future bond. I know Mr. Welch is going to cover some of that topic under reports for the standing subcommittee report. Is there any, before we move off of that agenda topic, is there any questions, comments, or recommendations at this time from the administration on that agenda item? I know it's a standing agenda item. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, appointment to Facilities Management and Planning Subcommittee. This is a item that I placed on the agenda, actually, and in your package, you should have your package that you received on Thursday, you should have a letter in there that was sent to Mrs. Jarrow, the school committee clerk. Have a citizen who's been attending the Facilities Management Subcommittee meetings and has requested to be added to the subcommittee as a member. I had that individual submit a letter to school committee clerk, Mrs. Jarrow, reflecting that request and to pass the copies of that request on to the committee. I spoke with the chairman of the the facilities subcommittee, and to make sure there was no objection to adding an additional member to their numbers. There was not. As you see in the letter, I think this individual has a lot to offer to the subcommittee as far as professional background, and I think would be a good resource to the subcommittee and adding the perspective of how building modifications and upgrades and whatnot affect students with disabilities, and making sure those accommodations are considered when renovating or upgrading facilities. So, and as you see in your package, that individual's name is Mr. Bursons. So at this time, I would ask if there's a motion to add Mr. Burson to the Facilities Subcommittee. Mrs. Advisano?
I'll offer that motion.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made by Mrs. Advisano, seconded by Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Page. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Mrs. Jarrow, could you, can you just contact Mr. Bursons and notify him and provide him with the subcommittee's calendar as well? Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, moving preschool to Fishing Cove. Dr. Thornton.
Sure. Just to go back a few meetings, I did talk to you about how once we did move the Lafayette neighborhood, that left open the potential to have some movement. I did tell you we could move the 4 classrooms, the preschool, if you will, to Fishing Cove and have a capacity of approximately 87%. It fits. It makes sense. Given the Lafayette move, I would recommend that we would move the preschool to Fishing Cove.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. I had a couple of questions at our last meeting. I think you had initially made this recommendation or discussed this. My concern at that time was including the staff, preschool staff, in the process and collaborating with the preschool staff to get some feedback and input from them on the move back to Fishing Cove School. That program was at Fishing Cove Elementary School several years ago. I know it's hard to get feedback and input from parents of preschool students, being that for the most part, the preschool students move on the following year, and the parents of preschoolers this year, those same preschoolers and parents won't be there next year. Did you have an opportunity to speak with any of the preschool staff?
Rachel Santa did the day after we met, unbeknownst to me. My calendar has not yet put them on, but I have heard they were favorable, but I'm still waiting to meet with them. One thing I would say is going back to before my time when we had the preschool as a separate entity, one complaint I did hear loud and clear was that they were frustrated there was no administrative support in the building. If you were to move them to Fishing Cove, they are under a principal the entire time. So that to me was one plus for doing that. But no, have not sat with them yet. On the calendar, then back off again. But Rachel did meet with them.
Okay. And my second question is, I think it's a great opportunity to make the preschool as part of the school community there at Fishing Cove. I know this is a touchy topic, but we know we've invested some school funds as well as some funds that were raised by parents and organizations out in the community to fund the preschool playground that's currently over at Davisville Elementary School. And I know we're still going to put that playground to good use. So that's not a concern. I know it's not going to sit there and go unused. I know we'll still put it to good use. My concern is the moving over to Fishing Cove. Obviously, the question is playground opportunities at Fishing Cove for children with disabilities and accessibility for children with disabilities. I would ask that maybe we can consider looking at the IDEA funds and the grant funds to see if there's some type of...
We already start checking that out because you're correct. Fishing Cove's playground is not where we want it to be. Some good news would be that in talking to Rachel Santa, we believe we could locate probably half the money needed through our special ed, but we need the other half ourselves. So we think we had half through federal funds.
Great. I'm glad to see that we're moving forward and hopefully have something in place. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Brunel?
During these difficult financial times and budgetary constraints, I would be in favor of this move.
especially since it's bringing the preschool back to where they used to be. Dr. Thornton, when you say they would pay half and we may have to come up with a half, do you know about what the numbers are?
Approximately $40,000. It's a round number for a playground, but we have to really see how many apparatus do you want, scope of the playground, how many kids, et cetera. But it's a round number. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, around 40?
Sounds about right.
How much was the one at Davis Villa?
About 40?
It was.
45?
Wow.
That doesn't
Okay.
include the surface.
Right, okay.
Surface.
I think the surface will be the number one area of concern over Fishing Cove, because I think there's age-appropriate playground equipment there. I think the surface is the area of concern, and making sure that surface makes the playground equipment itself accessible to the children.
And the new playground is not movable?
No, I asked that question a long time ago. In terms of liability, warranty, you really can't rip these out of the ground and really keep the safety issues in play. No one's going to certify we can put these back in and do it safely and
Okay,
still
had
sign
to-
off on them.
No problem, just had to ask.
Yep. I asked that question a while ago.
Thank you, Mrs. Brunel. Mrs. Benson?
In speaking about the playground at Fishing Cove, and Dr. Thon, you are correct, there is monies available. Money is there, and we have a better chance and a lot of chances to get this money. We still have money that haven't been used for the rest of the year that we haven't. We don't have it, but we didn't put in for it. But Fishing Cove, there's a playground going west, what they use for the playground now, for the larger children that play in, and then there's a little spot on the back. So I think playground situation can be worked out, and I would also like to say that I'm glad to see it come back to Fishing Cove, that we chose that one, because Fishing Cove, let's face it, Fishing Cove is the population that in Davisville is the population that we get the preschool kids from. So we are really moving near our clientele. And under the ADA, there are a lot of things that can be explored. And Dr. Thunder is very good at that, so I don't think we have to worry too much about the money.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. I'm sorry, did you have a...
Just to clarify, we haven't moved on this yet, but if you do this tonight, we'd start moving on the playground as far as spec it out, what do we need, et cetera, how big, scope, price, et cetera, and start working on it now. But we haven't done anything yet because we just haven't made the move official, so.
Great. Mrs. Page?
So, Dr. Thorne, I want to make sure I have clarified that we would still need to look for $20,000 to be able to do the playground.
Yeah, I mean, CIP, operating budget, fund balance, you would tell me, we'd have to decide where do you want to take that from.
How does that work if we say that we would like to do any, not necessarily this group, but we would want to have that be fundraised? Would that be something you would still be able to move forward with, or would you not be able to move forward with because you would still wonder as to how quickly the $20,000 could be raised?
Historically, I've been told all playgrounds in NK have been fundraising driven. We haven't yet used our funds to do a playground. This will be a first time. It might be a precedent for us to now deal with. But yeah, in terms of playground goals and raising money, it's March. We could certainly have that conversation. We have time.
So, well, I guess what I'm asking is that if we said, oh, we wanted to see about raising the rest of the funds through fundraising, we could still move ahead right now. That's more my question.
Yes, we could.
Okay.
Mr. Welch?
Dr. Thornton, is that the only modification, inside or out, connected with this move?
In terms of the building being pre-K accessible, I'll defer to Mr. Draper as far as the scope of the building net and students.
As far as I know, again, it would depend on the program. We take a look at what they used at Davisville L and overlay it on what's going on at Fishing Cove.
Keep in mind, the Cove did house that population prior, so it should be still fine.
Thank you.
Dr. Thornton, I just wanted to comment, what was so great about having it there before was it had rooms, that had bathrooms and sinks and worked out well for preschool.
Great. At this time, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation to move the preschool program from Davisville L to Fishing Cove.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded by Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Page. Before we vote, was there any public comment or questions on this specific agenda item? Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Moving into new business. New business is for discussion only. There'll be no action taken by the committee on new business this evening, and it'll be placed hopefully on our next agenda on the unfinished business. 5A, preview of renewal of administrators' contracts. Dr. Thornton.
Sure, you have a memo in your packet. It's my preview of the contract renewals. I won't read the whole memo, but I'll kind of try to capture it for you if I could. The first piece, I am talking to you about the concept of a 2-year contract for administrators in good standing. You can read through that. As you recall, the school committee took an action last year to assign zeros for some administrators that were eligible to receive a 0, and that's the first group you see in your memo. In the second group, per your last conversation, I'm informing you of the folks, if you so choose, that will be eligible for the 0 this coming fiscal year. And then if you turn the page, the last group, if you go back to Dr. Fear's tenure, some folks were assigned 3-year contracts that will be starting their last year. They're in a unique situation where in their contract in year 3, their raise is based on a formula. If you remember the whole old index, the step times the ratio, et cetera. In essence, what I'm telling you there is, so goes the teacher's contract, goes those folks. So in essence, you have the opportunity to have everyone at least go one time through the 0 this next fiscal year if the contract talks go how you would want them to go. So with that, my hope would be next meeting to bring a draft to you of the contracts, and a first meeting in April, come back again for a vote consideration.
Mrs. Brunel?
Thank you very much. That is so clear, precise, and so easy to follow. That all of it is laid out in this one document. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions or comments for Dr. Thornton? Mr. Welch?
Yes, I'd just like to continue to voice my objection to talking about terms, contract salary terms in terms of percentages. 2% doesn't sound like a lot of money until you realize how much money the 2% is based against. My preference has always been to deal in terms of dollars. That's what you spend, not percentages. I would prefer that we talk about dollars when we're talking about increases and not percentages.
Mrs. Brunel?
I just would, when you bring this forward, Dr. Thornton, could you tell us the dollar amount of what the 2% would mean?
For each contract, well, actually, the contracts you'll get next meeting have the exact dollar amount of each person. You'll get a stack of contracts, the names and the dollar value in there. One point of clarification, in my 2-year concept, to be clear, I'm looking to get lock in the good administrators for 2-year commitments. However, I'm not looking to assign any kind of dollar value in year 2, because given the financial situation we're in, I would assume it would be, locking in the employee with the salary TBD in terms of year 2. So in terms of Mr. Welch's question, next meeting you would have the actual contract draft with a dollar amount.
So just to be clear, the 2-year contracts that you would propose and recommend to the committee, the first year of the contract would obviously have a dollar amount assigned with it. The second year would have a to be determined.
Correct.
It won't be a percentage or an exact dollar amount assigned. So basically, the contract is guaranteeing employment for 2 years, but only guaranteeing what the salary will be for year 1. Year 2 will be determined.
That's correct.
Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Thornton. Mrs. Page?
Dr. Thornton, when you give us the contracts, could you make sure that you have something with that spells out just how that will follow through on the budget that's already been approved, as well as if how much of an increase if you're recommending giving somebody a 2% increase?
The budget book already had an assumption of 2% built in, so the worst case is already in your budget book approved.
Could you reiterate again why there are 3 people who you indicated that you thought the 2% salary increase was appropriate?
Sure. Those folks were given the 0 last year. As you recall, folks were put on 3 2s and 1-year contracts with Dr. Fear, and through just a luck of the draw, these folks were hit last year and given the 20% copay and 0 last year. So in terms of the committee's wishes, I believe the committee had said they wanted everyone to go through it once, so they did their time last year. So I would put them back to the 2% to be consistent with the ESP contract that was recently settled. I thought that was the fair number to put them in at.
Right, and recalling the conversation we had around this last year, it was a matter of 2 points. One was obviously the fiscal crisis and the budgetary crisis we find ourselves in. Also, I think it was the consensus of the majority of the committee in doing a comparison to some of those salaries assigned with those contracts or those positions. North Kingstown was pretty much on the high end of the spectrum when compared to those same positions and salaries across the state. And I think to level the playing field and put us in line with what you see for averages in the state for those same positions and contracts, I think that was the part of the concept of that the committee put forward when we had this discussion last year. So, anyone else? Mrs. Badvisano, I'm sorry, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did, but I was just going to note some of the things that have already been said in terms of the groups of individuals we looked at last year, and saying that the contracts that were locked in at the time that we would, that came up, we would then have a 0% increase, as we did for the ones we could last year.
Thank you. Anyone else? Again, this is not a voting item for tonight, it's just informational purposes from Dr. Thornton, and he'll provide a draft contract to the committee at the next meeting for consideration, and hopefully our first meeting in April, we can move towards an action on those recommendations. Mrs. Benson?
I would like to thank Dr. Thornton for coming forth with that, because I know what a hodgepodge it was when you got it, because we had some was 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and you never could get them all together. And then in the midst of that, they formed association, but they didn't change that arrangement. So it's very nice to have them all doing it at the same time, because that created a few problems. You never could get the correctness of the steps and the money and how long they've been in their contract. So, very good job, what I expected of you.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson.
Dr.
Okay,
Expected of you.
Mr. B, if you could hold on just 1 minute, we'll let Dr. Thornton do the preview of the contract for food services supervisor as well, just in case you wanted to comment on both of those agenda items. Thank you.
Sure. I had this as a separate correspondence in that it is an enterprise account, kind of a unique situation. But given what we have been looking at lately in terms of the scope of the job changing, truly this job has been morphing in terms of gaining more responsibilities, reaching out to other possible revenue-generating areas. You see before you once again, my concept for this, also making it a 2-year contractual position. I will come back to you with a salary in the contract next meeting, but essentially this would go from an 11-month to a 12-month position and follow all the GCB provisions. So, truly, I think just the amount of work that Ms. Cawley has ventured upon in terms of garnering other possibilities, both in town and out of district, have been really, really special. So with that, I made this recommendation. I'll come back next meeting with a draft.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. I'm sure we'll get into more of a discussion of that topic when we actually have a draft of the contracts outlining the additional roles and responsibilities that food service supervisor, Ms. Crawley, has ambitiously taken on. But I just, briefly want to make mention of that now. The recent contract with the West Bay Christian Academy, which we're now providing food services to West Bay Christian Academy. as well as the North Kingstown Senior Center, and I know there's a couple of other school districts that Ms. Crowley is in discussions with, where we could hopefully consolidate our food services and provide services to those school districts as well. Again, obviously to hopefully, and the goal would be to not only provide the service, but obviously achieve a profit or revenue that we could obviously use to apply against our budget deficits. So thank you, Mrs. Crowley, for all your work and initiatives that you've taken in that role. Mr. B?
Dick B., 5 Seagrass Way. My comments, Mr. Chairman, will apply to any and all contracts, the monetary aspects of which my comments are directed to. And I would say, first question I would ask you, I don't necessarily expect an answer, but why? Why does anybody working for any municipality deserve an increase? I heard the Dr. Thornton say he'd like to lock them in. Where are they going? Central Falls? People and employees of the town, this particular time in our country, in state and town, are lucky to have a job. And it's a good-paying job. They don't need an increase. They may want an increase, but there are plenty of people and taxpayers that aren't getting increases. If you folks want to dig deep into your pockets and be generous, that's your problem, and that's your privilege. But don't do it with taxpayer monies. There are plenty of people out there, my age, younger and older, that are getting no cost of living increase from the government for the next 2 years. So why are you giving employees an increase? Let them learn to get along with the money that they are earning now. They haven't done anything. Are they going to do anything better than they did last year? I suspect not. I speak for a lot of people in my age category that pay taxes to this town that do not utilize the services of the school. And I'd say, why? Why are you giving a cost of living increase or an increase at all and a contract at all? They should be, at least at this point in time, employees at will, like many other private companies have all over this state. Please consider that, because any increase or contract involving monetary increases is unacceptable. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mrs.
If I could just insert a quick comment. I know Mr. B said no answer is required, but I'd like to give one. I generally agree that we really shouldn't be giving contracts, for the most part, to employees that don't already have contracts, that we don't need to look at locking ourselves in. But if we're going to go in the direction of revenue generation and consolidation, which we hear over and over again, and that's what this employee has done, if you take a look at the information that's been presented to us. And so, in general, while I may agree with that, I think, the Commissioner of Education has also said that she's going to look at increases for merit pay. That's one of the things that's going to be done to recognize excellence, is merit pay, in order to have employees perform, which is what we're talking about doing with the teachers, with the Central Fall issue is centered around that. So while in general I may agree with that, I think you need to recognize when there's someone who's actually going out and double, tripling our opportunities and bringing revenue in. So we need to be open to that. So generally I would agree, but I just wanted to make that comment.
Just a quick one.
One second, Mr. B. Ms. Carroll, did you have a comment?
Yes. Several years ago, the regulations of the Department of Ed changed, requiring that all school principals, assistant principals receive contracts. And I provided that documentation to this committee, if not last year, the year before. So you are required to give contracts to all principals, all school administrators.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Mr. B.
In regard to Ms. Carroll's comment, I don't have any objection to comment. Same pay, same benefits. That's a contract. I wouldn't have got up again except I heard the word consolidation. But I also heard last week hiring of a controller. At the time, we have attrition for $100,000, including benefits. So consolidation doesn't seem to be a strong argument for what I just said. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's two agenda items here, and the first one, let me address. I do agree that promotions and merit pay deserve increases where you can demonstrate, new police captain, teacher, is taking over as department head, something like that. That certainly deserves an increase where someone's taking over more duties. But cost of living increases is another issue. We just heard the chairman say that we're one of the highest paying districts in the state for our employees. We're also significantly higher than our town employees, significantly. They had a freeze last year, and they will have a freeze this year. And we're increasing that delta if we give school employees, some school employees, an increase this year. Cost of living increase. Tie that to the CPI, Consumer Price Index, or GDP. You're not going to find a correlation. There is a higher issue. As far as the second issue, I think it's worth saying that the Director of Cafeteria Services and her staff have come before the school committee the prior 2 years with cuts on their own. They did, efficiency improvements on their own, and they were able to reduce staff. And in the past year, the cafeteria director has gone out to the town manager and secured the senior center. The town manager, if you go down to it was at the senior center, town manager, town employees are now buying lunches at the senior center because they're so good. And I've heard from parents that it's real food in the cafeteria as opposed to what, had been there before. And the fact that she's going to not only other school districts, but the Christian Academy, she's really doing some innovative things, and I think that this is, those are the kinds of things that we need more of in this town, and we need it between the school and the town, and between the school and other school districts and other entities like Christian Academy. So I commend the school district for doing that in the cafeteria service people, but I would also remind you, town people, and there were people last year without contracts who worked for the school department who were given 0 pay increases, clerks and whatnot. I think there were 8 or 10 of them. Are they getting increases this year? So they will be getting 2% or whatever increases this year.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The people who work for the school district, who are not in a bargaining unit and do not have a contract, last year they were given a pay freeze.
Right.
Will they be getting a cost of living increase, COLA, this year of 2%?
Last year, they received a 0 and a 20% copay. This year, they're in for a 2%.
Okay, so they will be giving one. Just remember, the town, all the town employees who are not in a bargaining unit, not, and town manager, police chief, fire chief, second year in a row, pay freeze.
Thank you. Trish, I know you appreciated that recognition plaque we gave you a few months ago, but recognizing you in your contract would be would be a little better. Thank you. So Just one quick point I want to make before we move on is that the school administration, the superintendent, and the committee as well, and just to recognize the initiative that was taken last year in the contracts that were approved for our administrators, and putting a clause in those contracts where additional pay increases would be tied to merit pay based on their performance and hitting the goals and objectives that the superintendent lays out in their evaluation. So I think the superintendent and the school committee took a huge step in the right direction in taking that initiative, which pretty much coincides with a lot of the mandates that we're seeing passed down on the federal and state level, and moving forward with all employee contracts. So I just wanted to recognize the initiatives that was taken last year to be out in front of that process, and I hope we can continue that. So those agenda items will be on our next agenda as well. We are scheduled to reconvene into executive session at 9 o'clock, but I know Mr. Welch had a presentation on the Standing Subcommittee Report, Facilities Management Planning Subcommittee Report on Facilities Master Plan. Mr. Welch, if you would like to give that presentation. I know we tabled it at our last meeting. If you would like to offer that presentation at this time, we can certainly do that. And if we don't finish, we can certainly continue it on our next agenda as well. Hang on one second.
Real briefly.
Okay.
In your package, you have a copy of a document which is a draft. The Facilities Management and Planning had a meeting with Joe DeSilva from RIDE, who he approves all construction funding aid for schools. And what we have done, we've already gone through and had an approval for Phase 1. This document will cover what RIDE requires for Phase 2, which is a 5-year plan on the physical plants that we own, to have professionals ascertain the stability of the product and tell us what we need to be planning to do to those products during the next 5 years. The thing that RIDE does not want to do, and we certainly don't want to do, is to spend good taxpayer money in a facility that either A, is not salvageable, or B, is subject to closing within a 5-year period. That is not to say that if we're using a facility and it needs some emergency repairs, even if we were going to close it, that would not be considered. But basically, this 5-year plan will set out what the condition of the facilities are, where money will need to be spent over a 5-year period. This is an expensive proposition, but it's one that RIDE requires in order for us to go forward. This draft is being reviewed Thursday by Facilities Planning, and it's also being reviewed by Public Works Director Phil Bergeron. And that's really about all I can tell you at the moment. We have nothing more than that. Ned, do you have anything to add? I did it correctly? I didn't step on my toes. Okay, thank you, Ned.
Before we just move into questions and comments from committee members on that agenda topic, I just wanted to thank the members that are here this evening from that subcommittee, Mr. Draper, Mr. Welch. I know you guys are meeting weekly or bi-weekly and putting in a lot of hours, and there's a lot of knowledge on that subcommittee from the members of our community that have volunteered their time and services. So look forward to moving forward with recommendations from that
Mr.
subcommittee.
Chairman, if I might add, Mr. DeSilva did make a comment at that meeting which was really uncalled for, but he said he had never been before a committee with that much talent. And I take that with a certain amount of pride for us, our community, that we have the people in town who have the background to serve on that committee. That is important, because what we have to say, what this committee has to say to you and to them, will be received differently than a committee that's made up of people who are not professional in the field.
Okay. Now, is he counting you as part of that committee when he said
No,
that?
no, no.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mrs. Advisano?
You just took the words right out of my mouth. I wanted to thank Mr. Welch because he's put in a lot of hours on that committee as well as several others. In that particular committee, he's put together a really great team with a lot of background there. So, and I think it'll really serve us well moving forward with the CIP and moving forward with our 5-year plans, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Welch on the information he presented to the committee this evening? Great. Okay. I believe that we are at the 9 o'clock portion of our agenda to reconvene into executive session for legal advice, collective bargaining pursuant to Rhode Island General Law 42464 and 4246-5A2, executive session for job performance and annual evaluation for the superintendent pursuant to 42464 and 42465A1. So at this time, I'll ask if there's a motion to adjourn, reconvene into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We're going to